2007, Amendment Bill 2019. The bill was read for the first time in this hallowed Senate on Wednesday, 13 November 2019. The objectives of the bill. The objective of this bill is to amend the extant provisions of the Public Procurement Act 2007 by providing that the procurement of goods and works from the Ecological Fund Office be conducted through a direct procurement process as provided for in the Act, rather than the open competitive bidding process used in all other cases. The bill also seeks to amend the Act to increase the number of days within which a payment shall be deemed a delayed payment under the Act. Mr. President, this proposed amendment is simple and uncomplicated. It merely recommends very unambiguous amendments to specified provisions of this Act in order to improve the operational efficiency of our procurement process without adversely affecting the underlying purpose and intent of the Act. The sections are as follows, Mr. President. Please, I have the floor. Mr. President, the sections are as follows. 1. Section 16, subsection 1C of the Act provides, subject to any exemption allowed by this Act, all principles for public procurement shall be conducted by open competitive bidding. The proposed amendment to this particular section is by open competitive bidding, except procurement of goods and works from the Ecological Fund Office, which shall be conducted by direct procurement in accordance with the provisions of this Act. Number 2, section 24, subsection 1 provides, except as provided by this Act, all procurement of goods and works by all procuring entities shall be conducted by open competitive bidding. And the amendment goes thus: except as provided by this Act, all procurement of goods and works by all procuring entities shall be conducted by open competitive bidding, except procurement of goods and works from Ecological Fund Office, which shall be conducted by direct procurement in accordance with the provisions of this Act. Mr. President, the third one, section 37, subsection 2 and 4, state as follows: any payment due for more than 60 days from the date of the submission of invoice, valuation certificate, or confirmation or authentication by the ministry, extra-ministerial office, government agency, parastatal or corporation shall be deemed a delayed payment. All contracts shall include terms specifying the interest for late payments of more than 60 days. And the proposed amendment goes to replace 60 days with 180 days in both sections. Mr. President, number 4 reasons for proposed amendment: direct procurement by the Ecological Fund Office. Mr. President, recall that the Ecological Fund Office was established in 1985 with the objective of creating a pool of funds which would be solely devoted to funding ecological projects to mitigate serious ecological problems in Nigeria. Its core mandate includes, among others, to reduce ecological problems nationwide through timely and efficient intervention, and to facilitate quality and effective implementation of projects through timely release of funds and monitoring. Mr. President, distinguished colleagues, I have a personal experience that informed my proposal of this amendment. I was privileged to serve as the Chairman House of Representatives Committee on Environment and Ecology in the 7th House. And in that capacity, I observed the unreasonable delay between the time of the procurement process to the time the intervention begins. I observed that delay always results in the situation where the original amount earmarked for the project is eventually insufficient to fund the project, thereby creating a unnecessary variation in terms of contractual amounts. Against this background, Mr. President, I can sincerely say that the Ecological Fund Office cannot operate optimally and live up to its core mandate if we continue to subject them to the same open competitive bidding process with its extended timelines under the exam provisions of this Act. Open competitive bidding is the process by which a procuring entity, based on previously defined criteria, effects public procurement by offering to every interested bidder equal, simultaneous information and opportunity to offer the goods and works needed. Presently, under the Act, open competitive bidding requires that invitation for bids be advertised in at least 2 national newspapers and in the tenders journal not less than 6 weeks before the deadline for the submission of the bid. Consequently, when all the other timelines are factored in, the open competitive bidding tender process sometimes takes up to 20 weeks to complete. The more complicated works, as is usually the case in ecological disasters, have even longer tender processes. This is quite understandable in the light of the underlying purpose of the Act, which is to ensure and sustain an open, transparent, and competitive federal government procurement system. Mr. President, distinguished colleagues, this extensive and long drawn-out open competitive tender process does not adequately address the expedited interventions needed in emergency situations. When situations arise that require ecological intervention, time is of essence. The delays inherent in open competitive bidding process invariably results to the worsening of the ecological conditions, which early intervention could have prevented. Mr. President, erosion-prone areas, for example, people lose portions of their land daily to erosion as the gullies created by these ecological disasters get closer to homes and buildings. Homeowners literally wake up to find that their homes are now dangerously close to an erosion site, forcing them to evacuate and ultimately lose their homes. These are the situations which could have possibly have been avoided with timely interventions. These timely interventions are hampered by this time-consuming open competitive bidding for natural disasters. Mr. President, the exam provisions of the Act contemplated a process of direct procurement in emergency situations. Section 42, subsection 1c of the Act provides in pertinent part that a procuring entity may carry an urgent need for the goods, works, or services, making it impractical to use other method of procurement because of the time involved in using those methods. Section 43, subsection 1a provides that a procuring entity may carry out an emergency procurement where the country is either seriously threatened or actually confronted with a disaster, catastrophe, war, insurrection, or act of God. Given the above enumerated provisions of the Act, and being cognizant of the need for expedited responses in ecological situations, I respectfully submit, Mr. President, that these proposed amendments do not derogate from the intent of the Act, but rather is still in line with the core mandate of the Ecological Fund Office to provide speedy response to emergency situations caused by ecological disasters across the nation. This is my opinion in a necessary amendment. Increasing the number of days required for delayed payment. Section 37, subsection 2 of the Act provides that any payment due for more than 60 days from the date of the submission of the invoice, valuation certificate, or confirmation or authentication by the ministry, extra-ministerial office, government agency, parastatal or corporation shall be deemed a delayed payment. And Section 37, subsection 3 provides that delayed payment shall attract interest at the rate specified in the contractual agreement. The net cumulative effect of this provision is that most of the agencies and parastatals of the federal government which engage in the procurement process incur huge financial liabilities as a result of the interest accumulating from these delayed payments. Agencies almost never meet up with the 60-day payment timeline, and in the process incur delayed payment penalties in all instances. This amendment will ultimately save the Federation a lot of needless monies used for paying interest on delayed payment. As we all know, contractual agreements are fully binding, and contractors are within their legal rights to seek judicial redress in cases of breach. It is absolutely necessary for us to effect this simple proposed amendment and obviate the necessity of incurring unnecessary liabilities. Like the previous one, this proposed amendment is also a very necessary cost-saving proposal. In conclusion, Mr. President, standing on the provisions of Order 80, subsection 1 of the Senate Standing Rule 2015, may I respectfully now propose, in the light of the foregoing, explanation that the bill, as presented during the first reading, be now amended as reflected in paragraph 4 above. A copy of the bill with the proposed amendment is attached. The bill is neither in conflict with any provision of the Nigerian Constitution, nor with any act of the National Assembly. Furthermore, if this bill is passed into law, it will help in ensuring a smoother and more efficient operation of the Public Procurement Act 2007 and save a lot of unnecessary expenses associated with delayed payments. Finally, in compliance with the provisions of Order 77, subsection 3 of the Senate Standing Orders 2015, this bill, if passed into law, does not create any financial burden on the federal government. Mr. President, distinguished colleagues, I thank you for your attention to this matter, and I plead for speedy amendment of this and approval of this bill. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you very much.
George Thompson II, Justice of the Peace, Commander of the Order of the Niger. I represent the Rivers East Central District. Mr. President, I rise to grudgingly second these two very important amendment bills. Grudgingly because if I had gotten the National Assembly journal earlier enough, I would have been able to compare the three different amendment proposals and then come out with very stronger stand on them. But even though it is not so, we have heard what the both proposals have given to us. And the importance of the bill cannot be gainsaid. Because the purpose of the Procurement Act is to give accountability, expose corruption, and fast-track the process of development in the country. Now, if it is to give accountability and transparency and credibility of every contract carried out in the country and due processes, then lacunas are found in it. It will affect what the intendment of the original act supposed to achieve. So I want to support the amendments. Although there may be some problem, or you've already said that we are going to put the three proposals together and then they will be amended together. Maybe during the process to the third reading, we will be able to see the line items of what we are going to amend, and then we'll be able to do maybe further input. But the problem with government in procurement and contract processes, where I have a problem, I don't know whether the bills capture them properly or not. When a contract is awarded and there are dates for payments, when government fails to pay, the implication of failure to pay. I'm lucky I belong to the Committee on Local and Foreign Debt. And when we see the debt profile of this country, debt profile that are being owed local contractors. You will bend your face and ask a question. Why did we award the contract if we know we cannot pay? Why do you award a contract for a particular thing and then encourage a man because of the terms available? If you don't pay within 60 days, it will attract interest. Now the man goes to the bank, gets some funds, execute your job for you, you certify it, evaluate and certify it, and you don't pay him. 60 days gone. Meanwhile, while government cannot pay, even the interest, not the capital, not the main sum, not even the interest, the main sum. We are talking about interest. The main sum has not been paid. And eventually when they pay, they just pay the main sum. And then if they carry them to court, the commission will just be going to court and court and court and court. Why can't we only award contracts for money that is available for such contracts? I agree, sometimes there could be two years or 3 years projection on a particular contract. But when the contract has been awarded and we don't pay, we are putting those Nigerian companies into bigger problems. If they have their own personal funds, they will not go to the bank and get money. They don't have money, they go to the bank and get money. It has happened to many of us when we are doing contracts. You borrow 300 million naira for a year, and then you are not paid for 3 years. And then the money built up to 450 million naira. When eventually they pay you after 4 years, you have to look for money to retrieve your good name. So I think that when they are doing the public hearing, experts will come. They are going to invite stakeholders. Experts will come. Let them look at all those areas. Nigerians are suffering because of unpaid contract. We have to do something. We have to do something. And when a man is owing the bank, and the bank keep on calling you on daily basis, the blood pressure rises, and then death toll rises. I remember my own friend, Gito Nigeria Limited. He was at the Niger Delta Ministry or Ministry of Works, waiting to see the minister. He fell down there and died. Bodo Body Road is still hanging around there. The man invested billions, borrowed from bank, was not paid. This Public Procurement Act is there. Till now, that man has not been paid. Let us look critically when amending this bill, so that we also put a clause somewhere. If government doesn't have money, they should not award that contract, so that they don't put our people in jeopardy, put family in disarray, and people who have sent their children to school could not study well because of lack of finances from their parents. It is causing so many homes to be orphanage homes because father has died, mother has died because of non-payment of contract. Mr. President, I second the proposals, but the bills, but I pray that such relevant amendments should also be looked at when taken in the committee of the whole next time, or during the public presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. So,
the two presenters of this bill, and also align myself with the last speaker, distinguished Senator Sekibo. Indeed, Mr. President, distinguished colleagues, the importance of the Public Procurement Act is not in doubt. And the fact remains that whatever we do in the Appropriation Act is subject to the performance of the Public Procurement Act, because all the procurements that will take place within the context of the Act, the Appropriation Act, is guided by the Public Procurement Act. Mr. President, distinguished colleagues, I was privileged to have had contact with the operations of the Public Procurement Act, and I can say very clearly that there are definitely some lacuna, some loopholes, some gaps, especially that this is 12 years since the Act was promulgated, and implemented. Mr. President, let me say that within the context of this debate, it is important we establish that the time frame for procurement is unnecessarily too long. On the average, 3 months, 4 months, 5 months. Some agencies spend the whole year going through, rigmaroling through different things. And at the end of the day, we even end up having agencies, MDAs, that because of delays in the procurement process, funds are finally mopped up at the end of the financial year. This is something that we must take note of. Because we sit down here, there are very critical sectors that are in need of funds, but at the end of the day, we end up having agencies, ministries, and departments that are not able to do the procurement process, and the monies are being mopped up. So I think this is a very important point for us to take note. The second aspect is, if you look at the pre-qualification process, on the average, Mr. President, distinguished colleague, as at date, there are about 21 conditionalities that a company must meet. And starting from, for example, the VAT, looking at the PENCON registration, looking at PENCON remittance, looking at ITF, these up to 22 conditionalities are being set for most of our service providers. The implication, Mr. President, distinguished colleagues, is that a very large percentage of our small and medium enterprises are left outside the procurement process. And we all agree in this chamber, under various other debates, that the role of the SMEs in moving the economy of this country cannot be overemphasized. And a situation where you leave them out because they are unable to meet the conditionalities for pre-qualification, I think speaks volume. And therefore, I want to say that this is something we must take note of when we come to look at the clause by clause. Now, I'm happy the last speaker, in the second bill by Senator Ekwenefe, was talking about emergency procurement, even though she limited it to the ecological funds because of the ecological conditions. But Mr. President, distinguished colleagues, one of the very familiar activity we all have is traveling on the roads, except for the few who go by air. But if you travel by road, you see very dangerous sections of the road where the local people will put a stick and red clothes trying to warn motorists flying that road that there is danger. Come back the next week, you will hear there is an accident, lives are lost. All these type of situations abound on our roads. And by the time you call the attention of the Federal Road Maintenance Agency, the complaint they will tell you is that the procurement condition does not support emergency work by them. So I think this is the time for us to take note of that, because life matters. If you have experienced a situation where your own loved one had died on a section that should have gotten emergency attention, I think you understand what I'm saying. The other point I would like to make is, we have been promoting the issue of made in Nigeria goods. How do we get made in Nigeria goods to be a priority? I think we need to look at this Procurement Act to make some adjustments so that at the end of the day, we are able to provide some provisions that will enable our small and medium enterprises that are doing some good work to be patronized either as first line of refusal or first choice, rather. The other aspect is the issue of mobilization, which I think distinguished Senator Lau talked about. I know situations where some people come in and fraudulently collect the mobilization and disappear. So while I support the fact that we need to increase, in increasing it, we must put in some very stringent conditionalities to safeguard government from losing its fund by those who intend to defraud government through that loophole. The other aspect is, within the context of the Procurement Act, there is a lot of discretion. And I think if we must ensure, like one of the bills, the lead debate said, if we must ensure that we comply to the International Convention Against Corruption, then we must, as much as possible, reduce the discretionary provisions within the Act in such a manner that there is certainty, there is transparency, and we can clearly see what happened in the procurement process. Mr. President, distinguished colleagues, I believe this particular amendment of the Procurement Act is timely, and I want us to fast-track it so that perhaps before the end of the year, if these amendments can be diligently carried out, we will now be ready to say that the 2020 Appropriation Act, when finally passed, will be implemented using a very brand new, or rather a new improved Procurement Act. With this, Mr. President, I support that this bill be read the second time, and I urge my colleagues to do the same.
Amendment of this Procurement Act, because some of the identified challenges and the numerous loopholes that are in this 2007 Act need serious considerations. The issue of over-centralization and the bureaucracy of the process, especially the one that has to do with no objection certificates, need to be looked into because it is over-centralized. If an institution is in Rivers State or in Port Harcourt or in Maiduguri, they've done the tender, they've seen who won the tender, they've awarded the contract. Before even awarding the contract, there is delay because they are waiting for no objection from Abuja, from the DG. And in most cases, the BPP will require both the contractor and the officers that did the tender in Maiduguri or in Port Harcourt to come and meet with the DG in Abuja. It's cumbersome. That has to be looked into. And there is also this lack of political will, especially when projects that are supposed to be located in a particular place and the political head, vis-a-vis maybe the minister, feel that project shouldn't be there, should be taken to another place. I think the Procurement Acts have to look into this issue very seriously because so many infrastructural development projects that are necessary for this country have been delayed because of these things. If we can frame it in the Acts, I think it will help seriously because it always creates unnecessary delays. Then the ambiguity in the qualification criteria, which are often prescribed by the procurement managers, is another issue. Because despite the fact that you have a very good valued product, because of the interest of the manager, he would do away with that, and at the end of the day, the country loses, and the project also suffers. So I think I would suggest that in the next procurement, in the amendment, we should carry along, we should try as much as possible to include architects, engineers, and construction engineers as well in the board of the BPP. Then the issue of the lowest evaluated responsive bid is another problem. We should look at that seriously because I can bid for anything and bring anything, and at the end of the day, the value for money is defeated. So I will suggest that the next amendment, this amendment that we're going to do, we should bring the best value bid approach. The best value bid is that when you look at the quality of what we want or the quality of the contractors first, what kind of project have they executed previously? And then they bring that kind of quality, it will help. I will give a very good example of what happened in Abuja Airport. What happened in Abuja Airport is part of the failure of the Public Procurement Act. Because after the review of what happened at the Abuja Airport, the cost of putting that correction, cost of correcting that problem is almost close to the initial cost of the project. Then we look at how we can accommodate different kinds of tendering. Because at the moment, it only accommodates two methods of tendering. The open and direct tendering. Some projects, especially in the military or in the oil sector as well, there are projects that also must go through the BPP. But the method of tendering can be different from the general tender that that is being prescribed in the BPP Act. Then there's lack of adequate mobilization, which now he has suggested 30%, which I believe is very good, and that will fast-track projects as well. And then another issue is advance payments guarantee. Usually, the small-scale contractors are being asked to go and get bank bonds. Bank guarantees. Before banks give you guarantees, usually there are certain things that you have to also keep. So I think that area should also be looked into seriously. And I would suggest that we go with financial institutions that have their core functions in issuing bids, such as insurance corporations. Insurance companies can issue bids for projects. Then
you can round up now.
The issue of conflict resolution. Nigeria is still suffering from that. And why is it that? Because it wasn't captured in the Public Procurement Act. I give you an example with the P&ID case. And so many others. So conflict resolution should be part of the amendment that we can bring in to safeguard not only the funding, but also the public interest. Because as Nigerians, we will have, it's necessary for us to put patriotism first before self-interest. So some of these agreements that we sign, I will suggest that they go through the BPP before being sealed. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you very much.
This opportunity to make my very brief contribution. Mr. President, I seize this opportunity too to thank my colleagues that have introduced this amendment to this very important document of government. Mr. President, I think we all agree that the bottom line on all the issues that we are conversing here is the need for us to timeously procure goods and services for the purpose of good governance without necessarily compromising transparency and accountability. And therefore, Mr. President, I think our concentration here should basically be on filling the gaps that are missing in the current Procurement Act of 2007. Mr. President, as I'm talking to you and we are leading this debate here, I'm aware that the Procurement Council that is necessarily supposed to fix and lay out the policy guidelines for the enforcement of this act had not been put in place by successive governments. And therefore, it becomes necessary, especially against the backdrop of our desire now to write the wrongs or apparent lacuna in the past legal instruments that we have in executing government policies, moving, for instance, our budget period to appropriate time in order that implementation becomes easy and meets the reality on our ground. And so, Mr. President, I think that this act to amend, this bill to amend the act is very, very important, and we must give it the serious attention that it desires. Mr. President, we must have a time frame for which the President must constitute the Procurement Council. Because as it is now, every action that has been taken by the procurement entity now, or entities, can be characterized as illegal. Because even the threshold that we talk about all the time on the procurement process is supposed to be fixed by the Procurement Council. That is non-existent. And so who has now fixed the threshold that we are all canvassing for, or mentioning all the time in the process of procurement? Mr. President, I'm also aware that there are certain basic contradictions in the procurement process. For instance, if we say that military procurements or security procurements should not be bound by the basic procedures here, without properly characterizing or categorizing those security requirements that should be left out of the ambit of this law. And if we have not mentioned that, then of course we have left ambiguities that unscrupulous public servants can exploit. Of course, there is no gainsaying at this moment that corruption in the procurement process is part of the bane of the ineffectiveness of the implementation of the Procurement Act. And so, Mr. President, I support this move to amend this Procurement Act and hope sincerely that given the experiences that we have garnered in the process so far, we'll be able to lay out a proper document that will complement a new budget cycle that we're introducing so that Nigerians can get the benefit of the efforts to give us their mandate to represent them here. Mr. President, thank you.
So Albert Bassi Akman, Akwa Ibom Northeast. Mr. President, let me equally thank our two distinguished colleagues for sponsoring this, the amendment of this bill. And also commend you, Mr. President, and the leadership of the eighth Senate, of the ninth Senate, for their focus, Mr. President. Having looked at the trend of events since we were sworn in, and then the amendment of the PSC Act, the processing of the finance bill, and here the returning of the budget to January to December, and here the Public Procurement Act. Mr. President, I believe that the Ninth Senate has demonstrated its commitment towards the untangling of those clocks that actually try to hinder our progress as a nation. Mr. President, in my elementary economics, it is said that government is the biggest spender in any economy and also the main driver of that economy. And the foundation of government spending has to do with a lot on the procurement process. Mr. President, distinguished colleagues, I believe that when this law was first enacted in 2007, that was the best we could get at that point in time. But over time, we have implemented it, and it is the functions and the duty and the responsibility of the National Assembly to review these laws on the basis of the experiences of its implementation. Mr. President, this amendment is apt, extremely very timely, because if by the special grace of God we are able to achieve the January to December budget year, of course, we are going to achieve under your able leadership. Mr. President, what we need to drive that budget is the procurement. Having in mind that we must take into consideration the number of months in a year that we have the rainy seasons and not call it the dry seasons. So I believe very strongly, Mr. President, that this amendment should be fast-tracked, that if we are able to deliver the PSC Act amendment and we are coming in with the finance bill and pass it into law and assisted by Mr. President, and then we are able to put in place an appropriate procurement act, then we are good to go as a nation. Mr. President, I want to say that I've read through the gazetted bill and the lead debate by the chairman public procurement, that the contents, those sections that are to be amended, if it's properly articulated, will actually add value to most especially the small and medium scale sector, which is where most of the Nigerians businesses operate. We must do everything possible to ensure that we protect this interest. Mr. President, we must also look into the issue of increased mobilization, Mr. President. We must be able to dimension between a construction procurement and a supply procurement. For a supply procurement, you can pay as much as 70% if it's fully backed up by bank guarantee. Because the supply project is a supply procurement. It could be through a letter of credit. A letter of credit is more or less like a bank guarantee. So we must be able to look at it at that point in time, because I cannot be giving you 30% mobilization to go and buy me a Hilux. How much can you buy? But if you back it up with an appropriate bank, irrevocable bank guarantee and a performance bond, Mr. President, it will also equally add a lot of value. Mr. President, we must also this procurement amendment must also look into the issue of contract splitting. Contract splitting. Because if you take an agency like NDDC, for example, how many of NDDC contracts has gone to Federal Executive Council, for example, but they sit down there and they work under the threshold of 249 million and award over 10, 18 contracts under one. So you must also look into the issue of contract splitting, because the Procurement Act and the law has taken into cognizance the level of the threshold of authority it is to add value to the procurement process. So this amendment must also look into it squarely. Mr. President, in the oil and gas sector, to procure a contract might take up to 2 to 3 years. So this act must also be able to sit down and we dimension it. That as we are bringing in military security into the Procurement Act, we must also look at the critical nature and the role that the oil and gas sector plays in our economy, and try to also ensure that you cannot procure a project for 3 years due to interests of stakeholders. We must also address it. So there are certain basic fundamental issues that we must address in this. And I must commend your lead debate, Chairman for Public Procurement, because the issue of putting in place a price mechanism. Because you will see in 2 different agencies procurement a project. This one buys a Hilux for 10 naira. The other agency buys the same Hilux for 30. Now, I think these are things we can. This act, Mr. President, and I must commend your leadership. And I want to urge my colleagues that a time has come. We are at the verge of turning things around in this country. That the way we are going as the 9th Senate, we will write a name in gold when the time comes. I commend you. I commend your leadership, Mr. President.
Thank you.
Lagos West Senatorial District in the Senate of the Federal Republic of Nigeria. Mr. President, very distinguished colleague, let me also join others in commending your leadership and also the chairman of the committee. Mr. President, since the inception of the 9th Senate, you have taken the bull by the horn. You have tried as much as possible to see or exploit where revenue accruing to this government or this administration can be sourced from. By that singular action, we have succeeded in passing into law an amended version of the production sharing contract, and also now before us is the finance bill, which is under consideration. As you source for this revenue, you equally try to put mechanism in place where judicious application of this revenue will be done properly. And by this, you have taken the bull by the horn by looking at the Public Procurement Act with a bid to unbundle this act. Mr. President, what this tends to achieve which I have summarized. Number one, you are trying to fight the issue of abandoned projects across the country. Today, whenever they mention about the gross domestic product of this country, part of those things that is factored into it are these abandoned projects across the nation. Because one way or the other, government have committed funds into these projects. And they will be tagged ongoing projects. And at no cost, all these have to come together for us to give a true picture of what the gross domestic product of this country is. And with this action, you have tried to streamline the issues of abandoned projects across the nation. Mr. President, another one major area which other colleagues have spoken about, which I want us to look at, is the issue of this certificate of no objection. And one of the main reasons why you see the Bureau of Public Enterprise, which I also want to suggest, that enterprise, as presently constituted, must be unbundled. Must be unbundled. And while the bill is under consideration at the committee level, one critical area we must look is the current composition of this particular board. You notice that 3/4 of the agencies of the government goes after this certificate of no objection. And this is in a bid to circumvent the process. That is in a bid to ensure that proper people who are fit enough to do this job have come out of the process. And what is the reason given? It is the process, the elongation of the process of procuring that they want to shorten. And that's why they are going for certificate of no objection. I want to believe that with this singular amendment that we are doing to this current act, we will be able to take care of this excessiveness on the part of the Bureau of Public Enterprise on the issue of certificate of no objection. Harmonization of pricing. Mr. President, very distinguished colleague. This is another important area which yourself has even mentioned it. We want to buy a set of computer in the Ministry of Finance at a different price, and the same set of computer in the Ministry of Communication at a different price. I believe this bill will be able to put that into perspective and try as much as possible to follow it to the latter. And for all my experienced colleagues who have get involved in one contract or the other, who have shared their experience and their bottlenecks, we have listened with rapt attention. And I believe that is part of what we need in this chamber to guide our line of thinking while trying to amend this act. And Mr. President, I also want to draw some caution that as much as we are trying to unbundle this act, we should not try and tide ourselves. For every section that we will be amending in this current act, we should try and make sure that we look at it, the nitty-gritty of this particular section, so that we can be well guided, so that not after passage of this bill, we not say, wow, we will not have done it like this, we will have done it. So we need to take time to ensure that whatever we are going to amend in this bill is in conformity with the international best practices. While rounding up, Mr. President, you have given a leave to any administration coming on board to plan within the 4-year plan of one term a project that you can get started in the first year and complete it within 4 years by this singular action. And these are more the benefits we intend to derive by amending this bill. I want to commend you again, the leadership and those members of the committee who will be working on this, that at the end of the day, we will be able to give Nigerians a public procurement act that will be generally acceptable. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you very much. Senator.
If we can get this right, then Nigerians will experience more infrastructural development. What we are trying to do by this amendment is to stop taking the Volume 5 of Due Process and Procurement Act, or the tranquilizing drug of gradualism in execution of projects in this country. Mr. President, what this act has done to us as a nation is that it has engaged us into more of paperwork than getting the real job done. Speaking from experience,
At the NEC one day, I had to meet the Vice President of the Federal Republic of Nigeria, and I said to him, I said, sir, is it possible that we call governors, ministers, one day, everyone should stand and show the pictures of the projects you have done, vis-a-vis the amount of money you have collected. For me, that's the best due process. But today, in this country, somebody may make a borehole and put one solar light, and he would justify the use of billions of naira because due process has actually been met. So that's why I call the pauperization of our economy. So, Mr. President, I speak with this with a lot of emotion because I'm speaking from practical experience. So it is no longer important in Nigeria if the job is done. What is important if the paper is in order? So I would advise that in reviewing this act, let's create a target. Because our culture, we are very smart people in Nigeria. We are very smart. You can't catch us if you want to do the paperwork. But if you say, listen, where's the work? Show me the work. How much is it? It will solve a lot of these problems. So let us consider time and target for projects done. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Senator Cliff.
In this country, first and foremost, Mr. President, it is important for us to, at this point, agree that we need the National Council on Public Procurement to be in place, to be able to check these problems that we have currently in the procurement industry. First of all, it is not very right for us to have, excuse me, for a procurement to last for more than 3 months, as we are presently experiencing in this country. Because if we continue with that, it will be very difficult for us to be able to execute most of the projects that we actually earmarked for that particular year. Apart from that, you find out that the payment arrangement, it's also very faulty. Because for you to have a credible agreement, the people that are awarding the contract and the contractors alike must be very sincere in order for us to be able to achieve something very, very meaningful. Because if a contractor is mobilized to site and he has finished his work, right on time, and you go ahead to own the contractor for 4 good years, it means that there's no sincerity in that agreement. So, in order for us to be able to make some progress in this direction, government must be ready to fund the projects that are to be executed. It's only by so doing that we can have some element of credibility in this process. Because if we don't do that, this problem will continue to be with us. We are looking at our colleague brought the issue of emergency projects. Yes, we need such arrangements, especially in the road sector and the area of environment. But what is normally done, that I know, that there's what we call a call-off contract. That call-off contract.
Please help him with his phone.
Is to have pre-qualified selected contractors that have the capacity to mobilize to site at the shortest possible time. So they are now, for such a process, they have to be pre-qualified and identified as contractors that can intervene at any particular point in time. So when there's a problem, you can call contractor A to mobilize to a particular site, or contractor B to mobilize to a particular site. That is the way it is done. It is called a call-off contract, as it were. That has to be inserted in the Procurement Act that we are trying to put in place. Thank you very much, Mr. President.
Thank you very much. Senator Adi Young.
Young, representing Plateau North. Mr. President, distinguished colleagues, this very amendment that is being sought to the Procurement Act is very apt and most welcome. Because the Procurement Act was meant to institutionalize transparency, accountability, and to check corruption. And of course, to institutionalize due process in the procurement process. The amendments that are being brought forward by the sponsors of the bills of the amendment, I would want to just comment on one or two aspects of the amendment. I would want to draw our attention to project costing in Nigeria, which is quite exorbitant compared to other jurisdictions. And I think it would be necessary during the public hearing for the issue of project costing to be addressed. The aspect of mobilization to contractors, the upward review is necessary in order to ensure that we practically make it possible for all those that have awarded contracts to really commence the process. What is obtainable now is not enough to empower them to commence the projects and to mobilize to site. The issue of thresholds and contract splitting is another thing that we'll need to take a look very closely during the public hearing. Because what has happened is, as a result of attempts to circumvent and breach the provisions, contracts are splitted. When you compare the cumulative sum that comes up, you find out that it violates the Act and the thresholds that are provided. I also want to align myself with the call for us to stiffen sanctions against breaches and infractions in the Act. And of course, the lowest bidder principle, to me, should compare with competence and capacity so that we do not end up having poorly executed projects on the basis of lowest bidder principle. On the whole, Mr. President, distinguished colleagues, I support the reading of these, the passage of these amendments on second reading. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, distinguished colleagues, on the amendment bills. This is because of the importance of these bills. The two bills for the amendment of the Public Procurement Act of 2007. 12 years down the line, we would have seen the strength and weaknesses of the Act. But certainly, the last 12 years have revealed the inadequacies, the loopholes, the lacunas that are in the Act. Like one of our colleagues indicated, we may pass the appropriation bill 2020 before the end of the year, and the implementation commences from January. But if this Act remains as it is today, with unnecessarily cumbersome and lengthy processes of bidding, the time we would have gained from passing the budget in time could be lost in processing the projects for implementation. So just like we've tried to give expeditious treatment to some of the bills we passed recently, this is also important and significant because it will add value to the implementation of the 2020 appropriation bill. And so many issues have been raised. about the weaknesses in the present act. I will not repeat any of them, but all of them that were raised are very genuine issues. I want to take this opportunity to urge all stakeholders who have anything to do or any interest on public procurement in the country and even beyond to take the advantage of the public hearing the Senate will hold on this bill, because it is important we have the contributions and submissions from stakeholders so that we have an enriched amendment at the end of the day. With this, I want to thank distinguished Senators Isa Shaib Lau and Uche Lilian Okunife Iyom for sponsoring those two bills, and of course distinguished colleagues for the various contributions made. I will now put the question. Those in favor that this bill, and that will be referring to the first bill, the bill sponsored by Senator Isa Shaibulau. I'll put the questions in two places, not as matched. Those in favor of that this bill be now read a second time, say aye. Those against, say nay. The ayes have it. The Clerk of the Senate. For an act to amend the National Council on Public Procurement and Bureau of Public Procurement Act No. 14 of 2007 and for related matters 2009. Second reading, and the bill is referred to the Senate Committee on Public Procurement and to report back within 2 weeks. I'll put the second question now. For the bill sponsored by Senator Uche Lilian Ekunife. Those in favor that this bill be now read a second time, say aye. Those against, say nay. The ayes have it. Clerk of the Senate. A bill for an act to amend the provisions of the Public Procurement Act 2007 to increase the mobilization fees paid to contractors and suppliers and other matters related thereto, 2009, and the bill is referred to the Senate Committee. The bill will now read a second time. Those in favor say aye. Sorry. I will take it again, please. A bill for an act to amend the provisions of the Public Procurement Act 2007 to increase the mobilization fees paid to contractors and suppliers and other matters related thereto, read a second time, and is committed to the Senate Committee on Public Procurement to report in 2 weeks. Distinguished colleagues, this is another very important milestone that we're about to really witness. If we're able to work hard in the next 2 weeks, we'll be able to cause the amendment, and the House will either concur or they are also going to treat, because we have an understanding with the House that we have to pass the amendment to this Public Procurement Act. Thank you very much for the various contributions. Leader of the Senate.